A very good morning to you. It's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Today we explore the cost of living crisis. We look ahead to tomorrow's local elections. We explore Boris Johnson's unique speech to the Ukrainian parliament yesterday and look at the Rwanda refugee scheme. Is it working or not? All that to come after your morning headlines.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, the European Union's going to stop importing Russian oil and refined products as part of a new sanctions package against Russia. The European Commission chief Ursula von der Leyen says crude oil supplies will be phased out in 6 months and refined products by the end of the year. In Ukraine, the governor of the Donetsk region says another convoy of buses has left Mariupol in the evacuation operation. Well, President Zelensky's confirmed 156 people were evacuated from the steel plant to the Ukrainian-controlled city of Zaporizhzhia yesterday. Sarah Everard's murderer, Wayne Couzens, and the killers of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo-Hughes will have their prison sentences reviewed at the Court of Appeal later today. Senior judges are going to hear challenges or appeals to the prison sentences of 5 killers. Pro-choice demonstrators have protested across the United States, demanding that abortion rights be protected. Well, it's after a Supreme Court document was leaked suggesting that judges may vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. That ruling in 1973 legalised abortion across America. Trade unions are warning cuts to rail funding will endanger passengers and increase the risk of serious train crashes. The TUC believes Network Rail will cut safety-critical jobs as part of plans to reduce annual spending. The Department of Transport, though, said that safety will always be the main priority of Network Rail. And today, party leaders are out visiting key electoral battlegrounds. It's the last day of campaigning ahead of voters going to the polls for local elections tomorrow. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Now let's head to Tom for the briefing.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, the cost of living crisis continues to pinch people's pockets. Water bills have increased by an average of 1.7%. Gas and electricity costs have soared by an unbelievable 54%. And, of course, increased national insurance contribution mean individuals and businesses are seeing the state take more of their income too. Now, the British Retail Consortium has revealed that last month's shop prices increased at their fastest rate in more than a decade. Well, to talk through the cost of living crisis, I'm joined now by Conservative MP for Yeovil, Marcus Fish. Welcome to the programme, Marcus. This is the most extraordinary time, it's fair to say, not just in the United Kingdom, but across the Western world as well. The government seems to admit that more could be done, but many people are feeling that not enough is being done.
Well, good morning, everybody. It is true that we are providing lots of money through rebates to the fuel bills, plus also council tax rebates and that sort of thing. But I would like to see us go further and offer, perhaps on a means-tested basis, or another way of making sure that this goes to those most in need of it. I'd like to see rebates on the VAT on fuel and on fuel bills, and also rebates on the green levies that are also added to those fuel bills. Because unless we get that base fuel element of inflation down, then it's very hard to see that not feeding through into prices in all sorts of areas elsewhere through the economy.
I suppose one of the big worries in this entire conversation is that inflationary trap. The Treasury is very concerned about a looser fiscal policy whereby more money is printed and that potentially exacerbates the problem. Is it your view, Marcus Fish, that this inflation is in part caused by the loose monetary policy that we've had over the last 2 years?
I think undoubtedly the combination of more spending, one way or another, and the supply chain bottlenecks that we've seen, both from the pandemic, but also in regards to energy, from the fact that there's just been massive underinvestment in energy sources over the last decade, particularly fossil fuels. Now we all want to move to a sort of cleaner environment and have less impact on it. But the reality is that moving there is going to require a huge amount of materials that go into whether it's the copper wire for the grid or the concrete for the windmills, or all of the different types of aluminium and different things that are needed for lower carbon and lower intensity modes of travel. These are things that take a lot of energy to produce in the meantime. And unless we've got a good supply of gas during that period, then we're going to see some of these prices rising very high. So I think we need to encourage investment to actually get more investment in those cleaner transition fuels like gas for the time being, in addition to trying to reduce the actual prices of fuels that people experience through cutting some of these VATs and other taxes that are on it.
Yes, I suppose that investment will take time to filter through into having a more resilient energy infrastructure. I wonder, Marcus Fish, in your opinion, did the Bank of England and the government get it wrong on inflation? Over a year ago, people were saying that they weren't worried about inflation, that they didn't think that inflation would be coming down the track, not just in this country, but in America and in Europe as well. And yet we have been struck by the most extraordinary inflation that few people sitting in the places that make the decisions saw coming.
Well, monetary policy is, of course, an independent matter here in the UK through the Bank of England, i.e. the Bank of England sets interest rates and the levels at which it intervenes in interest rate markets to try to set those rates. But it is true that people did think it would be more transitory, was the buzzword of this time last year, than it has turned out to be. And that is the concern, is that in the effort to preserve our economy during the pandemic, there were obviously emergency measures undertaken. And some of these numbers have been very, very, very big, and that liquidity is sort of washing through the markets, and a lot of people chose to bring forward purchases of goods rather than purchases of services, because going to restaurants wasn't as easy, going out, etc., wasn't as easy. Those sorts of service spending opportunities weren't available, and a lot of people decided to buy things. Now, I think it is quite possible, actually, and you're seeing it starting to happen in terms of when businesses order inventory for the future to sell. There have been such shortages that a lot of them have got their orders in the pipeline, and now that things are starting to arrive, they actually potentially don't see as much demand for those things another 6 months out. So it may well be that, in fact, there is a natural rolling off of some of these really nasty levels of inflation right now. But I'm concerned that the overall price level itself won't really fall very much unless we are giving people more discounts in their fuel, for example. And that will, of course, also reduce the pressure that they feel to ask for a wage rise otherwise, which is the other way that it could get embedded in the system and then force the Bank of England to act in a way that that might turn the steering wheel too far in the other direction.
Yes, I see. So a rebate in that sense might actually avoid that sort of inflationary trap of higher, of spiralling costs and wages. That's an interesting point there. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the conversation there, but Marcus Fish, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning and talking through what is probably the most important issue facing voters at the moment. Well, speaking of voters across the UK, people will be off to the polls tomorrow as local elections are getting underway. Thousands of council seats are up for re-election in England, and all councils in Wales and Scotland are being contested too. The elections are expected to be a watershed moment for the Prime Minister, who's grappled with Partygate fines, sky-high inflation, misconduct across Parliament and indeed a war in Europe. Well, GBNews political editor Darren McCaffrey is in Sunderland this morning for us. Darren, welcome to the programme. What's your sense of how people are feeling on the ground? Are people going to be voting tomorrow on national issues or on local issues?
Well, I think the first question is, Tom, are they going to be voting? I suspect one of the big narratives on Friday could well be how low voter turnout is. We know it's traditionally quite low in council elections, but it could be pretty low tomorrow. I say that because there is a sense just of political apathy. Always difficult to judge, isn't it? Why? Maybe some of the scandals at Westminster have not helped. Maybe people are feeling frustrated with politics at the moment. But I really do fear in many ways, because I would encourage everyone to go out and vote, but I fear that turnout could be low. In terms of what's going to come into play into the issues that people are going to vote on, it's, again, really difficult in local elections to work out whether local issues really matter. The bin collections, the potholes, the bus services, how badly or well run local councils are, how much council tax you pay. That will factor into many voters' decisions tomorrow, but then so will those big national questions that you've talked about, Tom, not least of all the cost of living crisis, Labour's arguments that the government needs to do more, that the national insurance rises the wrong tax at the wrong time, compared to the Conservatives' arguments, who's saying they are trying to tackle this crisis, they have got a plan in place, and in the end voters should be deciding on the competence of local councils, which they argue, the Conservatives would, that theirs are better run. So it is really, really difficult, and I say that because there's a leaflet actually that I've just spotted, not here in Sunderland but just down the road in Hartlepool, where the local Conservative Party are always pleading with their voters not to judge them on the national issues, not to judge the local party on things like Partygate, but rather on how well they have run the services in that community in recent years.
It's so interesting when we talk about Partygate, because this is very much the filter, the lens through which many people see politics at the moment. The media for 4 months on the trot seem to be talking about parties in number 10, and only really in the last week has there been a great deal of scrutiny with regards to events that the leader of the Labour Party may well have attended. Of course, his beer and curry with 30-plus people in Durham when indoor socialising was banned. Do you get a sense that that is filtering through, or will Conservative-leaning voters potentially be more discouraged than Labour-leaning ones?
Yeah, I think in many ways it's probably going to hit the Conservatives more. I think we over-egg, though, how much this is going to influence people's votes, in the sense that in many ways what happened in and outside Downing Street, or indeed what happened with Keir Starmer, though he has said this morning apparently that the police have definitely not been in touch, having kind of slightly avoided the question yesterday, is that I think there are things like the cost of living crisis that is going to have a much bigger impact, in the sense that, as I say, the Partygate scandal has reinforced rather than necessarily massively changed lots of people's views. In saying that, you talk to Conservative candidates, you talk to Conservative MPs, it does get brought up in the doorstep. It'd be wrong to dismiss it entirely, and clearly if the Conservative Party do badly tomorrow, if they lose hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of seats, there will be many Conservatives questioning whether Boris Johnson is quite the winner he once was, and I think that will pile pressure on the Prime Minister. But there is pressure on Keir Starmer and the Labour Party as well. They need to do well in places like here in Sunderland, at least retain where they are, if not make progress, and they need to certainly make progress elsewhere in the country if they are to demonstrate that there is a path to victory for the Labour Party. Because frankly, given the size of Boris Johnson's majority, if they're not doing very well in local elections mid-term, at a time in which the government frankly is under an awful lot of pressure, you'd have to question whether Labour will do well in a couple of years' time.
Yes, I suppose we're going to be looking at how many places the Labour Party can pick up and how many places the Conservative Party can cling on to rather than pick up. It's an interesting situation that we'll be looking across tomorrow, and of course reporting on Friday as well, with a special extra-long programme analysing all those results here on GB News. For now, Darren McCaffrey, thanks for joining us and talking us through tomorrow's important elections. Now, yesterday, Boris Johnson addressed the Ukraine Parliament and expressed his sympathy and support for the nation at war. He was the first world leader to have been invited to speak before Ukrainian MPs. Speaking in the chamber, hosting Ukrainian and British flags, he said, "This is Ukraine's finest hour that will be remembered and recounted for generations to come." A Churchillian moment. But is the West doing enough to help? Well, joining me now in the studio is James Marlow, foreign affairs expert. Welcome to the programme. It is extraordinary that Boris Johnson was the first world leader to have been given this privilege, to be invited to speak to Ukrainian MPs. I suppose that speaks to how the Ukrainian parliament sees the United Kingdom.
Tom, I don't think it is extraordinary because I don't think we were likely to see Joe Biden take the lead on this. The Germans, for obvious reasons, because their reliance on energy and oil from Russia, the same for other European leaders. So Boris saw the opportunity, stepped up and communicated this message yesterday, this speech, this talk in classic Boris Johnson style with his unique characteristics of humour. And I think this comes about because when he left Kyiv, 2-3 weeks ago, without the flak jacket, walking around alongside President Zelensky, his people at number 10 were thinking, now, how can we elaborate on this and build on this in time for the election? Not necessarily in a negative way and just trying to push Boris, because there's no question about it. He does support Zelensky. He does support the Ukrainian people. You can see that the way he speaks and the way he articulates his message. But at the same time, he also wants to be a thorn in the side to the Kremlin and, in particular, President Putin.
It's interesting looking at how Russian state media has been talking about the United Kingdom. There were suggestions from some people speaking on Russian state media that they could use some sort of nuclear weapon in the sea, perhaps a tidal wave unleashed on the United Kingdom. Probably not all that likely, but it does seem to be interesting that the United Kingdom in particular is the focal point for a lot of Russia's anger and ire. Does that mean we're doing something right?
Yes. Exactly. I think you just hit the nail right on the head. Well done. We are doing something right because there are two different aspects to this, or two different choices. You can either pretend it's not happening, stay out of it, shut the door, close the windows, and make sure that it doesn't affect you. And we know from history, we know from experience that eventually the bully boy will catch up with you once he's got rid of everyone else. So Boris is doing the right thing, and it's really a great thorn in the side to Putin. And he is the one. But from Russia's point of view, Russia sees England, Britain as such, as a tiny little island. It's now broken away from the EU, therefore there's no one to protect you, and I don't like the way that you're behaving. But as far as the nuclear threat goes, well, we have to remember that there is 9 countries in the world that have nuclear power. The two main ones, of course, are the US and the Russians, maybe China, because that's where a true nuclear war would take place. But I think we should most definitely play that down, because I don't think the Russian leader has any intention of thinking to myself, well, if I have a bad day tomorrow, I'm going to go back to my office, unlock the safe, push that button, and that's it. Well, it's not it, because basically what that means is, I mean, I'm talking in the 0.000 whatever case, that he goes completely nuts, and he would still need his chief of staff to endorse that. But if that was the case, you're talking about an international ballistic missile with a nuclear head on it, perhaps aimed at the United States. The US would hit back immediately. No Russian city would be. So we've got beyond ourselves. So right now, the focus is that the Russians have invaded an independent country, Ukraine, from 1991. That's when they gained their independence. And Boris and other Western leaders are saying, totally wrong. You need to leave the country. You're not going to do so. So we're giving the weapons in order for us to eventually, us being the Ukrainian side, to make an offensive against the Russians and eventually kick you guys out.
It's interesting looking at the Churchillian language that Boris Johnson used in his address. There are parallels that can be drawn with what happened in the 1930s, an emboldened and indeed aggressive expansionist German state then, one that had been hobbled by various financial crises and whatever. That is to some extent quite analogous to what has happened with Russia, a hobbled, a crippled economy, indeed an economy that's smaller than that of Spain. The United Kingdom spends more on our armed forces than Russia does on theirs. Are we doing now what the United Kingdom should have done in the 1930s, stopping that expansion before it entered into a worldwide conflict?
Wow. that's a long discussion on that, but briefly to touch on it, perhaps so, yes, and maybe it's right to say that we've learnt from history. We learnt from those dark days of Neville Chamberlain, who came back with that famous bit of paper, Peace in Our Time, in 1938, and of course it wasn't worth the paper written on. And Churchill and others in the House of Commons at the time knew that, and it was just a matter of time before things were going to develop. The same thing, by the way, can be said for the Russians today, because the Russians keep talking about the Nazis. If they don't like somebody, you're a Nazi being presumably from the days of Adolf Hitler. And yet they seem to want to delete and get rid of that history that for a time, 2 years actually, that they were allied with Adolf Hitler and the Nazis from 1939 to 1940. The only reason why Stalin tore up that agreement is because that Hitler decided to invade Russia after he left Britain alone.
Yes, no moral power to the Soviet Union, I suppose. I'm afraid we've run to the end of that conversation, but really fascinating stuff there. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, finally, today, reports out of Downing Street suggest that the government's Rwanda plan may be subject to legal challenges, delaying the start of offshore processing. This Rwanda deal means that those who arrive in the UK via unofficial and illegal routes, like those channel crossings we've seen spike to record levels, could be deported, assessed and given residency in Rwanda rather than Britain. Well, joining me now is Nadia Pilpchuk, immigration lawyer and policy specialist. Welcome to the programme, Nadia. It's interesting, this policy, because for a number of weeks, people were suggesting that the effects of the policy may be working. There were very few channel crossings, but now the number of channel crossings has risen again. And it doesn't look like the policy, although it hasn't started yet, it doesn't look like it's had that deterrence effect as of yet.
Well, certainly, and there are a couple of human rights organizations who are very much concerned about the well-being of those who ought to be sent to Rwanda, especially in regards to their access to healthcare or any other social services. Therefore, there are a number of organizations who issued what's called a pre-action protocol and are planning to challenge the Rwanda plan, and this is obviously will delay the implementation of the same, so it will take some time until it's actually going to be implemented, if so.
It's interesting that the government seems to be waiting for these legal challenges. Could the government not start the policy while it's being challenged? Is that not an option before the government?
Well, I believe it's going to be very difficult for them to do so, as it will raise a voice of those who are very much concerned. And obviously, human rights organizations are a strong opposition to the government, and they will not permit the same to happen unless there will be clear guidance and clear policies written, which will reassure that people are going to be safe. But especially, it's going to be difficult to think even about the mental state of those who are going to be sent to Rwanda, especially those first ones who definitely there will be some challenges, there will be some problems. So, well, the system must be very much clear and very, very, very reassuring if any single person will be sent to Rwanda under this plan. Therefore, I do believe that the government will still wait until the decision will be taken by the judicial authorities.
Interesting, government waiting there. I wonder, on what grounds will this policy be challenged? What does the government need to watch out for? What will the arguments in court be over specifically?
Again, social and healthcare, this is the primary points that are at the moment being challenged by the organizations, because at the moment the Rwanda plan does not include any clear point in regards to the healthcare access to those who are going to be sent to Rwanda, and again the social services.
And so if you were to finally in this conversation give your assessment on how likely it is that this policy will actually ever see the light of day, that actually planes will ever start flying to Rwanda with people who have crossed the channel aboard them. What is your assessment on the likelihood of that?
It's difficult to predict, because obviously everything now the ball is with the government, so they need to respond to the pre-action protocol, and they have few options, either to agree and amend the policy or disagree, and then it will clearly go to the procedure, what's called judicial review, and it will take a good couple of months or even a year for the same to be taken. So even if the Rwanda plan will be implemented, it's not going to be anytime soon, so not in a month or two, definitely.
Well, really interesting stuff there. Thank you so much for talking us through it. Nadia Pilipchuk, immigration lawyer and policy specialist, of course. Thanks for joining us. That's it for the show today. Coming up, it's To The Point. But first, here's the weather.
Good morning. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a bit dull and damp out there first thing, but it will very gradually brighten up, albeit with some heavy showers later. And it's a warmer day compared to the last few days, particularly towards the east. High pressure is towards the southwest of the UK. Around the top of that high, weather fronts are toppling in, and these are generally weak affairs, but, well, they're bringing an awful lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain. The rain tending to be on and off. Mostly it's light, but a few moderate bursts in there, and they are spreading northwest to southeast across the country during the morning. By the afternoon, the cloud lifts a little, some breaks developing, but actually I think a lot of places will keep the cloud cover, and heavy showers will form. Hail and thunder possible in some of the livelier downpours, but away from the showers, actually 17, 18 Celsius possible in, well, eastern Scotland, central and eastern England. So it's going to be feeling a bit warmer. But those heavy showers, of course, will be pretty lively in places, especially towards central and eastern parts of the UK. They ease away overnight, clear spells for many, but cloudier for Scotland, for Northern Ireland as well, with some outbreaks of rain in the far northwest. 8 to 10 Celsius typically as we wake up on Thursday, and plenty of sunshine to greet us across much of England and Wales. Eastern Scotland generally bright as well. Western Scotland, Northern Ireland seeing cloud and some outbreaks of mostly light rain. That turns more showery into the afternoon. 1 or 2 showers possible for Western England and Wales as well. But actually a good deal of dry and bright weather, especially towards the southeast, where somewhere like London could get 20 or 21 Celsius, mid to high teens generally elsewhere. The warmth stays with us on Friday and into the weekend. Some outbreaks of rain or showers on Friday, but drier and brighter for the vast majority on Saturday and Sunday.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well.